Hi Guy, welcome back TV Spoilers. Young and the Restless spoilers that what Kane uncovered did not arrive as a single, explosive revelation but rather as a slow, suffocating realization that crept into his consciousness and refused to leave. At first, it was nothing more than a fragment of a conversation overheard by accident, the kind of half-formed threat that powerful men often exchange behind closed doors. Yet something about the tension in those words, the calculated calm with which Victor spoke, lodged itself deep inside Kane's mind. It did not feel like the usual corporate maneuvering or posturing. It felt personal, targeted, and deliberate in a way that set off alarms Kane had learned, over years of survival, never to ignore. From that moment on, suspicion became his constant companion, shadowing every thought and coloring every interaction he had with the Newman family. As Kane quietly began to investigate, he did so with the discipline of someone who understood the danger of acting too quickly. He knew Victor Newman well enough to understand that any visible misstep could trigger retaliation, long before the truth was fully exposed. What disturbed Kane most was not merely the possibility that Victor was plotting against him, but the subtle implication that the battlefield extended far beyond business rivalries. The more Kane looked, the clearer it became that Victor's attention was fixed not on Kane alone, but on Lily and their children. That realization tightened something in his chest, a sharp, visceral fear that eclipsed even his growing anger. This was no longer about power or pride. This was about family. The evidence revealed itself gradually, almost mockingly, through documents that should never have crossed Kane's path and strategies that were never meant to be seen by him. Each discovery reinforced the same horrifying conclusion. Victor was preparing to use Lily as leverage, exploiting her vulnerabilities, her professional standing, and even the stability of her role as a mother to weaken Kane's position. The children, too, were woven into the strategy, reduced to pawns in a game where emotional pressure was the most effective weapon. Kane felt physically ill as the full scope of the plan came into focus. The cruelty was not impulsive or reckless, it was methodical, designed to corner him into submission by threatening the people he loved most. What made the betrayal cut even deeper was the name that appeared alongside Victor's. In the shadows of the plan, Adam's involvement was not obvious at first, but once Kane saw it, he could not unsee it. The realization struck like a blow to the gut. Adam was not merely aware of Victor's intentions, he was actively assisting them, lending his intelligence and strategic insight to ensure the plan's success. For Kane, this revelation carried a weight far heavier than Victor's expected ruthlessness. Adam had been someone Kane trusted, someone he believed understood the cost of growing up under Victor's relentless influence. That shared understanding made Adam's participation feel like a personal violation, as though Kane had been betrayed by someone who knew exactly how much damage such a plan could cause. Anger surged through Kane, raw and unfiltered. But it was quickly followed by something far more dangerous, clarity. The fury did not blind him, it sharpened him. Kane began to see the situation not as a chaotic attack, but as a calculated war in which Victor believed he held all the leverage. The assumption underlying Victor's plan was simple and devastating, that Kane would fold when faced with the threat of losing Lily or the children. That fear would paralyze him into compliance. What Victor underestimated, however, was the depth of Kane's resolve when it came to protecting his family. The same love that made him vulnerable also made him relentless. As Kane confronted the truth of Adam's role, the emotional conflict intensified. There was no satisfaction in recognizing the betrayal, only a bitter understanding of how deeply Victor's influence could corrupt even those who claimed to resist it. Kane grappled with conflicting emotions: anger, disappointment, and a grim sense of inevitability. Adam's choices did not erase the shared history between them, but they reframed it, turning past alliances into liabilities. Kane recognized that Adam's participation was not merely an act of loyalty to Victor, but also a reflection of his own unresolved need for approval, a need Victor had weaponized with ruthless precision. Despite the chaos swirling around him, Kane's determination solidified into something unbreakable. He made a silent vow to himself that Victor's plan would not succeed, that Lily and the children would not be sacrificed on the altar of Newman ambition. This resolve did not manifest as reckless aggression, but as a calculated commitment to exposure and accountability. Kane understood that confronting Victor directly without proof would only escalate the danger. Instead, he focused on dismantling the strategy piece by piece, ensuring that when the truth came out, it would do so in a way that left Victor with no room to deny or deflect responsibility. The emotional toll of carrying this knowledge alone weighed heavily on Kane. Each moment spent with Lily and the children became tinged with an unspoken urgency, a heightened awareness of what was at stake. The ordinary rhythms of family life took on a fragile quality, as though they existed under the constant threat of being shattered by forces beyond their control. Kane's love for his family, once a source of comfort, now fueled his resolve with a ferocity that surprised even him. He was no longer reacting to Victor's moves, he was preparing to counter them. In facing Adam, Kane confronted not just a betrayer, but a mirror of what unchecked loyalty to Victor could do to a person. The confrontation was less about accusation and more about acknowledgement and recognition that Adam had crossed a line that could not be undone. Kane did not seek revenge for its own sake, he sought justice, accountability, and protection. His objective was not merely to survive Victor's attack, but to ensure that such manipulation could not continue unchecked. Exposing the truth became both a strategy and a moral imperative. As the tension escalated, Kane's internal struggle reached its peak. He was forced to reconcile his desire for retaliation with his responsibility to safeguard those he loved. The path forward was fraught with risk, but retreat was no longer an option. Kane understood that Victor's power thrived on fear and secrecy, and that the most effective way to dismantle it was through illumination. By bringing the plan into the open, Kane aimed to strip Victor and Adam of the shadows they relied on, forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions. In the end, what lingered most strongly was not the rage or the betrayal, but a profound sense of clarity about the nature of power and love. Watching Kane stand against a force as formidable as Victor Newman, driven not by ambition but by devotion, underscored a truth that resonates beyond any single storyline. The greatest strength often emerges, not from control, but from the willingness to protect what matters most, no matter the cost. As a viewer and a storyteller, I find myself drawn to this moment not because of its spectacle, but because of its emotional honesty. Kane's struggle feels painfully real, a reminder that the most compelling battles are those fought not for dominance, but for family, dignity, and the refusal to be broken by betrayal. Kane did not come to the decision to seek out Billy lightly. It was not born from ambition or opportunism, but from a slow-burning fury that had been building inside him for far too long. What finally pushed him across that line was witnessing, firsthand, the sheer brutality with which Victor operated when unchecked. Watching a small, vulnerable business be crushed without hesitation, reduced to collateral damage in Victor's endless pursuit of dominance, stripped away any lingering illusions Kane might have harbored. What unsettled him even more was Adam's quiet efficiency in facilitating the destruction, lending intelligence and precision to a process that felt less like business strategy and more like calculated eradication. In that moment, Kane understood that this was no longer about isolated acts of cruelty. It was a system sustained by loyalty, fear, and silence, and it was growing more dangerous by the day. The realization forced Kane to confront an uncomfortable truth about himself. For too long, he had tried to navigate the world Victor dominated without fully challenging it, believing that distance and discretion could keep him and those he loved safe. But the evidence now sat heavily on his conscience. Restraint had not protected anyone. Victor's reach was expanding, his methods escalating, and his willingness to destroy anything in his path was no longer subtle. Kane felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a recognition that inaction would make him complicit. It was this moral reckoning as much as his anger that drove him toward Billy, a man he knew was already locked in his own battle with Victor over power and control within Chancellor Industries. Billy was not an obvious choice for trust. Their histories were complicated, layered with rivalry, skepticism, and mutual awareness of each other's flaws. Yet Kane also knew that Billy possessed something invaluable, a deep understanding of how Victor's empire intersected with media influence, corporate politics, and public perception. More importantly, Billy carried his own scars from clashes with Victor, scars that had hardened into resolve. When Kane sought him out, it was with the unspoken understanding that desperation alone could not form an alliance. What bound them was a shared recognition that Victor's unchecked authority posed a threat, not just to individual rivals, but to the integrity of every institution he touched. As Kane laid out what he had seen and what he had begun to uncover, the parallels between their experiences became impossible to ignore. Victor's tactics followed a pattern: identify weakness, apply pressure, and exploit loyalty until resistance collapsed. For Billy, the battlefield had been Chancellor Industries. For Kane, it had become his family and his future. The convergence of these struggles forged a quiet, dangerous understanding between them. This was not an alliance born of friendship, but of necessity. and both men understood the risks inherent in trusting one another. Yet in that shared vulnerability, a rare alignment of purpose emerged. Kane's contribution to this alliance was clear and deliberate. His expertise in artificial intelligence, once a tool for innovation and progress, would now become a weapon of exposure. He understood how deeply Victor's operations relied on complex financial systems and opaque data structures designed to conceal misconduct beneath layers of plausible deniability. By applying his knowledge to analyze these systems, Kane aimed to illuminate patterns of manipulation, uncovering transactions that revealed the true extent of Victor's influence and corruption. This was not about creating chaos for its own sake, but about dismantling the machinery that allowed Victor to operate without consequence. Billy, in turn, recognized the strategic advantage his position afforded. His access to internal channels, media networks, and influential voices within Chancellor gave him the ability to gather sensitive information that Victor assumed would remain hidden. Billy's motivation was not purely altruistic. It was fueled by a long-standing desire to reclaim agency in a world where Victor had too often dictated the terms. Yet beneath that drive lay something deeper, a determination to expose the truth, even if it meant tearing down structures he had once helped uphold. The alliance they formed was built on this mutual willingness to sacrifice comfort for confrontation. Together, Kane and Billy began to sketch the outlines of a plan that operated in shadows as deep as those Victor favored. Their goal was not immediate annihilation but strategic erosion. By targeting weaknesses within the Newman Empire's internal structure and public image, they aimed to destabilize Victor's authority from within. The plan relied on patience and precision, understanding that a premature strike would only provoke retaliation. Each step was designed to sow doubt, fracture loyalty, and force Victor into a defensive posture he was unaccustomed to maintaining. The tension of this secret collaboration weighed heavily on both men. Every interaction carried the risk of exposure, every piece of information the potential to backfire. Kane felt the strain acutely, knowing that failure would not only endanger his own position but could invite devastating consequences for those he sought to protect. The knowledge that Victor was capable of weaponizing family made every decision feel perilous. Yet it was precisely this danger that reinforced Kane's commitment. Fear, once a paralyzing force, became a catalyst, sharpening his focus and reinforcing his resolve. Billy, too, grappled with the psychological toll of the alliance. Aligning with Kane meant reopening old wounds and confronting the reality that Victor's influence had shaped far more of his life than he cared to admit. But there was also a grim satisfaction in pushing back, in reclaiming a sense of agency that had long been eroded by Victor's dominance. The alliance offered Billy not just a strategy, but a chance at redemption and opportunity to stand against a power he had once feared was untouchable. As their plan took shape, the broader implications became increasingly clear. Weakening Victor from the inside would inevitably create ripples throughout the Newman family, exposing fractures that had long been concealed by loyalty and intimidation. Kane understood the emotional cost of this approach, particularly given Adam's involvement in Victor's schemes. The prospect of further division weighed heavily on him, but he also recognized that silence would only perpetuate harm. Sometimes, he reflected, destruction was not an act of malice but a necessary step toward accountability. In the quiet moments between planning and execution, Kane found himself reflecting on the path that had led him here. The alliance with Billy was not something he would have imagined in a different life, under different circumstances. Yet it felt inevitable. A convergence driven by shared disillusionment and an unwillingness to accept Victor's version of order. Watching two men, each flawed and burdened by their own histories, come together against a common adversary underscored the complexity of resistance. In a world dominated by power, as a viewer and storyteller, I find this moment compelling not because it promises swift victory, but because it captures the fragile hope that emerges when people refuse to remain isolated. In the face of oppression, Kane and Billy's alliance is tense, imperfect, and fraught with risk, but it is also deeply human. It speaks to the idea that even in systems designed to crush dissent, solidarity can form in unexpected places. There is something profoundly resonant in watching characters choose cooperation over fear, even when the cost is uncertain. It reminds me that the most meaningful battles are rarely clean or heroic, they are messy, driven by anger, love, regret, and the stubborn belief that unchecked power must eventually be challenged. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Y&R and the Restless series from the perspective of a Longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.